So as we're gathered here together, it's just past 7:30, just past 2:30 in the morning in Jerusalem, Israel. It gives me extraordinary pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight from near and far in this wonderful Zoom world. And especially a special, very, very warm welcome, middle of the night welcome to someone who inspired me already when I was in high school in Johannesburg, South Africa. I remember distinctly when my principal, Rabbi David Chazdan, invited Professor Gerald Schroeder into the Torah Academy High School to speak to us high school boys. And I was blown away by his topic, Genesis and the Big Bang. I was an ardent student of science. I loved science and I loved Torah, and it always kind of bothered me that science and Torah seem to have been climbing two separate directions, like two parallel paths that didn't converge. But when Professor Schroeder came to Torah Academy Boys High School in Johannesburg, and he explained that they were actually one and the same, I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. I loved it. And I made a point in my mind that one day, if I ever open a Chabad house, I am going to reach out to Professor Schroeder and I'm going to ask him to present to our community. So tonight I have to tell you, it's certainly a dream come true for me. It's been very difficult to bring Professor Schroeder to our community in person. I've tried for about 5 years, and it's not that easy to schlep someone from Israel. But this year, when I reached out to him and I said, Professor, can we do it on Zoom? He said, Rabbi Vigler, you got a deal. So this is great, and with tremendous appreciation for his waking up. He set 2 alarms to wake up to make sure that he'd be up at 2:30 in the morning. It really is such a pleasure to have you here with us, Professor Schroeder. Just one thing I want to point out before we begin. We're going to have about a 40-minute presentation followed by questions and answers. But one thing before we begin, I want to point out is that it's really important to know that as a fundamental principle, God created the world. The Torah is the blueprint of creation. Therefore, by definition, it is impossible for there to be a conflict between Torah, the blueprint, and science, which comes out of the blueprint. Torah and science are not two different objects. One is the cause, Torah is the cause, and science is the effect. Therefore, in order to establish no conflict between Torah and science, you need to have 2 things: good understanding of Torah and good understanding of science. But if you have a good understanding of Torah and a bad understanding of science, or if you have a good understanding of science and a bad understanding of Torah, there's no hope to be able to come to the right answers. How much more so when you have a bad understanding of Torah and a bad understanding of science? Now you're really in trouble. But tonight we bring to you the best of both worlds. Tonight we present to you one of the most celebrated and accomplished Jewish people alive today, live from Jerusalem, Israel. He's not only an MIT professor in nuclear physics and all the other items listed in his very long biography, but also he's a celebrated scientist in Israel in which university was, I forget exactly right now. Was it Ben Gurion? I can't remember exactly which one it was, but a very celebrated university in Israel. In addition to all that, his scientific accolades and achievements, Professor Schroeder is also a Torah observant Jew who studies the Bible, who studies the Torah, and is excited to understand and dissect the nuance of what Torah has to present to us. Without much further ado, it gives me such great pleasure to welcome to our stage here in Palm Beach Gardens, to the Windows to the World program, Professor Dr. Gerald Schroeder. Thank you. Boker Tov.
Thank you. Thank you. I remember beautifully that encounter in Johannesburg, so many years ago, but yeah.
It would have been around 1994, 1993.
It could be around that time. Yeah, it would make about 30 years ago. And because one of the guests had the background of some giraffes, and that trip also, I know Barbara was with me. I think of that, my wife and some of our kids, and we went to Kruger. Kruger, was it Kruger? Which is the national park?
Yeah, Kruger National Park.
Yeah, Kruger. Yeah. One of our daughters was chased by a monkey because she happened to have some food in her hand. Another one fell in the, never mind, it was quite good. Yes, but what you say is, yeah, thank you so much, because we see these conflicts, and in the end, when you see that you have both the knowledge, it's no longer a conflict, but it is the same story. And it's exactly, I think there couldn't be a truer way to think. There's one author for the Torah and for Teva, for nature. So there can't be a conflict. And this evening, what I'd like to talk about would be one of the stumbling blocks that persons often come up to me. How can you, God, have made the world in 6 days? And if that's wrong, forget the rest of it. So I'd like to talk about the age of the universe and understand Torah and Teva, Teva being nature, from two. It's one reality from two very different views, but it is one reality. So, and if there are questions, I don't mind persons raising their hand and being unmuted, and they can ask you whatever your procedure is usually. It doesn't disturb me too much. If there's a crucially burning question, you don't feel you have to wait to the end.
Professor, just to point out that our topic tonight was advertised as an exciting and refreshing approach to how we understand the Bible and its account of creation, dinosaurs, and the age of the world in a way that is perfectly consistent with modern science.
That is what we talk about. 6 days, 6,000 years, or 14 billion years. The Torah wants a calendar. If there were no ages given, we wouldn't have a problem. If the Torah didn't tell us that Adam and Eve live 130 years before they have a kid named Seth, the third kid, and Seth 105 years, and if those numbers weren't given, we couldn't add all the numbers in the Torah, and then following the Tanakh, and then at the end, the kings, the queens, the prophets, whatever is to get, and we come with a number less than 1,000 years. So clearly, the Torah has some kind of, the Torah wants us to have a calendar, but the calendar makes problems because no age is given, no calendar, no worry about dinosaurs in billions of years. And a clue in the Torah that the Torah wants us to confront this problem, and then we'll get to the problem. I think we found a way that solves it without bending the Bible or bending the science. There's no point in bending the Torah to match science or bending the science to match Torah, because that doesn't convince anyone. But thank God logically, there's no need to bend either. The clue that the Torah wants us to develop a calendar from those numbers given, that it wants us to add them up and to get the numbers that come down to now finally to less than 6,000 years, is we have two sets of calendars. Adam and Eve have two kids. Adam and Eve have Cain and Abel. Cain murders Abel, chapter 4, Genesis. Cain murders Abel. Abel is now gone, and all the progeny of Cain are listed one after the other. And some of the amazing things that are like the Bronze Age is one of Tubal-Cain, the son of Lamech. Those are all listed. And then you come to the end of chapter 4, where it tells about the beginning of the third child, Seth, and then chapter 5 begins. Adam and Eve 130 years. They have Seth 105 years, and it should add. The difference between the listing of the progeny of Cain and the listing of the progeny of Seth, because it is through Seth that we get Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the rest of the Torah. The difference in the listing is there are no ages given. There are no ages given for Cain's line. Why? Because they would be superfluous, because Cain's line ends. So they add nothing to an ongoing calendar. And the Torah doesn't have any superfluous information. Every piece of information is crucial in the Torah. So if ages were given for Cain's progeny, that would be useless information. It doesn't go anywhere. But for Seth's progeny, you can add directly through with no breaks, right through to the end of the Torah, Tanakh, and then go on. So that's the clue that we make a calendar. We make the calendar, we add up the years, we get a number less than 6,000 years. We look out into space, and thank God the nature of the universe is everything has both a wave and a particle characteristic, including light beams called photons. So when those photons travel through space to us to reach us from a distant galaxy, they're going through space. But space isn't static, it's expanding. So as those photons travel to us, we don't go out to the stars to see them. The stars send us the information. These huge telescopes that we have let us gather a very faint light from galaxies that are very, very far away. And what was discovered by Slipher and then later Hubble, the famous Hubble telescope, Hubble and Humason, the work of, and then the work of Henrietta Leavitt, with most people never know her name. They should look her up. She's the heroine of science. There would be no age of the universe if it were not for the work of Henrietta Leavitt, who was about to get a Nobel Prize, but died of cancer before she got. Hubble put her up for a Nobel Prize because he realized all of his work was based on her discoveries. So Henrietta Leavitt, with two T's at the end, she's working, a person it's such work and it's essentially unknown. So the light comes to us in space. Space is stretching. The light waves are literally, the wave characteristic of the light is literally stretched out. So deeper and deeper into space, or as larger telescopes getting light from further in space, it was discovered that the further the galaxies are from us, the more the light wave is stretched. Well, that's interesting. Well, that's because it takes longer to get here. So if we look at that stretching of the light from different, we unstretch the waves, and we discover it takes 14 billion years of calculation to unstretch the waves to how they were when they left the galaxy gazillions of miles away. So that's how we get the 14 billion years, by looking at light coming from deep space, measuring how the wave is stretched, measuring how much it's stretched, and realizing how much it has to be compressed, how much time it would take to compress that back to the light, the characteristic, the wavelength that it had when it left the galaxy so far away. And that's the 14 billion years. So now we have a problem. We have less than 6,000 years from the Torah. We have 14 billion years from science. How can there possibly be a match? One thing that's interesting to realize is that the idea that the universe isn't just 6,000 years old, but might be longer, also based on Sum number 90, where we see 1,000 years near sight like a day that passes, or watch the light. We see immediately that there are different ways of understanding time. And Ramban, Nachmanides, about the year 1250, hinted at the idea of an old universe. He's in Mishpatim, in section where it says, when you buy a Hebrew servant, when you buy a Hebrew servant, and then there's 6 years of servants, and then the seventh he goes free. And elsewhere, every place there's a 6 into 7, the 6 days into 7 days, into Shabbos, the 6 years of servitude into then going free in the 7th year. Nachmanides says all those 6 into 7 have the deepest of secrets in the Torah, and they hint at the number of the year, the days of the universe. All the days of the world is raised. Kol yemot olam, all the days of the world. And because he was a Mikuban, he says, I'm not allowed to teach this. His primary student, Isaac of Akko, wrote that, and that's this again, year 1250. Realize 1250, no one's worried about dinosaurs, age of the universe. No problem. The Bible says 6 days, it's 6 days. Isaac of Akko said, this is what my teacher's hinting at, Nachmanides, the Ramban, but he's not to tell it because he's promised to keep it a secret, but it's being forgotten. Based on Psalm 90 and the sabbatical years, he makes a calculation, this goes back 800 years, that the universe is approximately 15 billion years old. It's almost a spot-on match to the 14 billion today. It's amazing. The idea of an old universe has always been out there. So how does this match with understanding? Am I still there? I touched. Do you still see me?
Yeah, we do. We still see you, Doctor.
Yes.
Okay, because somehow I lost. I see maybe. Okay, so I made the mistake of touching something. Okay, I'm not sure what I touched. Anyway, let's work on this now. Okay. First thing we have to understand in the age of the universe is the calendar is a 2-part calendar. Rosh Hashanah, the new year, the biblical new year, does not commemorate the creation of, you know these things, but I'm just going to put this out there so we have it on the table. Rosh Hashanah, as we know, does not commemorate the creation of the universe, creation of the soul of Adam. It's about halfway through this.
He's muted.
Professor, I'm sorry, you were muted. Can I mute? Can you unmute? That was my mistake. I'm sorry. I muted everybody by mistake, including the professor. Professor, can you unmute? Professor, one second. If you could just unmute yourself. Do you know how to do that? You just push the bottom left of the screen. There's a mute button. Oh, yeah, my mistake.
Rabbi, if you go to participants, I think you can unmute him.
Oh, I can unmute him? Okay, one second.
I think if you go to participants.
I don't think I can. Professor, do you know how to unmute yourself? Professor, can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, Professor? There you go. Okay, fine. So at the bottom left of your screen, we don't hear you, Professor. At the bottom left of your screen, there's a button that says unmute or mute. Can you push that button at the bottom left of your screen? We don't hear you. We don't hear anything you're saying.
Mine is the top right.
You actually can do it off as the administrator.
Professor, can you unmute yourself?
Now
There
you hear me.
There he
No,
goes.
okay, I touched this. It's
Okay.
all.
If
was
everybody
in the
else could just, if everybody else could just mute themselves, please, then it wouldn't disturb everybody else. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Professor. My apologies.
Okay, so we have these. So we have a calendar that's the sixth calendar. The Rosh Hashanah commemorates the creation of the soul of Adam, not the body, the soul. So Adam is the first human, not the first Homo sapiens sapiens, first human. But the calendar begins with Adam. It doesn't begin with the creation of the universe. So we have the years leading up to Adam, the 5.5 days. Adam is created halfway through the sixth day. The Talmud, in fact, says that Adam is created halfway through the sixth day. And if you go to day number 6 and you count the number of verses in day number 6, Adam is spot on halfway through. That may be the reason that the Talmud says that Adam is created halfway through the sixth day. So Adam's created. So we have the 5 days and a half of the sixth day leading to Adam. And then from Adam forward, the perception of time becomes earth-based time. And we add Adam and Eve 130 years, kid named Seth, etc. So we have 2 calendars from the creation up to Adam and thereafter. The description of time for the 6 days of Genesis is unique. It appears nowhere else in the entire Tanakh. The concept of Erev and Voker and then the day, evening and morning. Look, the word evening and morning appear elsewhere, but that couplet, then there's evening and morning and then the day, is unique to Genesis chapter 1, the opening sentences. So right away, we see that the 6 days of Genesis are in fact unique. That is to say, they are described in a way in which nowhere else is the passage of time described. So that's the first hint that there might be something going on here. And then the Ramban literally took me by the hand, actually takes it by the hand and leads you to the end, the Ramban being Nachmanides with an N at the end. Okay, and well, how does he say it? He says, look at the numbering of the days. End of the first day, Vihi Erev Yom Echad, evening and morning, day 1. Next day, evening, morning is Yom HaSheni, the second day, a third day, a fourth day, a fifth day, the sixth day. Why does the text say evening, morning, Yom Echad, day 1 or 1 day? Why didn't it say a first day? It says second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, the sixth day. Give me a first day. But the Torah says Yom Echad, day 1. Why day 1? Why not a first day? And he gives the answer. He says the reason the Torah says day 1, Torah says because there hadn't yet been a second day. The Torah is seeing time from the beginning looking forward. We look back in time, we measure 14 billion years. But how would time be from the beginning? The Torah says day 1 because there hadn't been a second day. exactly is because during the First World War, besides the pessimists, no one called the First World War the First World War. It was the Great War, the war to end all wars. I fought in the First Lebanese War. When I fought in the First Lebanese War, not one of us fighting in the First Lebanese War, including my 4 buddies that didn't come back from the First Lebanese War, said we're fighting in the First Lebanese War. Now, why didn't I say we were fighting in the First Lebanese War when we were fighting in the First Lebanese War? Because there wasn't yet a Second Lebanese War. And now I have to say, when I talk with my kids and my grandchildren, I fought in the First Lebanese War. The Torah is day 1 because there wasn't yet a second day. The Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. And that's the entire answer to the age of the universe. NASA, the National Space Authority, published this diagram. I think you can see this. Is that clear? Rabbi, is that clear what I'm showing? I can't.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. This diagram, this piece of paper that I'm showing here now is about 10 years old. It hasn't changed one bit. If you go to the NASA website, NASA, and then type in WMAP, the initials for this satellite that map the history, our history in the universe, got 2 people the Nobel Prize, you will probably own one of the most important theological statements that science has ever made. This is a time diagram. Creation of the universe starts at a small point, expands out, and then continues to expand. We're out here on the oval. That's where we live. This is a time diagram. Each vertical line is another billion years from creation to here. But the major statement of this is that there was a creation to our universe. Until about 60 years ago, which may seem like a lot of time, but science-wise and history-wise, it's a moment, persons thought that the universe was eternal. The universe is eternal. Don't you notice the stars? In fact, Einstein, one of the greatest minds probably ever, when he was doing his calculations on the formula that would describe the nature of the universe, was so certain that the universe is eternal that he changed his formula. And after he published it, it was discovered by other scientists that he had added a fudge factor. And he said it was later when it was pointed out, the error, it's the biggest blunder of my professional life, he said. He could have predicted the creation of the universe from pure mathematics. This diagram comes out with thousands and thousands of other measurements from Hubble and Henrietta Leavitt and Humason, the persons that made the diagram. A creation, the universe expands over time. We live out here and we look back and make the measurement of how old the universe was, and it takes us 14 billion years in calculated time to get from here mathematically back to here. But how much time would it get from here to here if you were looking from the beginning? That's the entire key to the age of the universe, that the Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. So you could say, Ozma, so what? So you see time from Timbuktu, from Canarsie. What does it matter where you see time from? Time is time. But that's not the case. How you view time is totally, totally dependent on how you understand the passage of time. And that's the answer also from Psalm number 90. A day like 1,000 years, a day, the night in the watch, 1,000 years. I mean, what's going on here? The fact is the Torah already in Psalms tells us that there is this change in the perception of time. So when we look at this 2-part calendar, and we calculate going to the back of the time, we have to determine how much the expansion was from here to here. And that rate of expansion, when you run time back in time by calculation, that expansion rate and now then the compression rate compresses the perception of time exactly one-on-one with the compression of the space of the universe. It's not a trick. Every astronomer knows this. It's not relativity. It's arithmetic. It's not even calculus. It's a standard understanding that when you see an object deep in space, and you see that it gets to you, and it takes time to get to you, And because we now know that the universe is expanding, how is it expanding? By space stretching. No one has a clue what that means, but we do know the universe is expanding by space stretching, because you can make measurements of the stretching of space. If you make those measurements on the stretching of the light waves, you can then tell how long it takes for the light waves to reach here. And what we look at now is the Nachmanides statement about this approach. And he writes the following: Hazman nivra, time is created. And then he makes it a sharpening of the point. He says, time is created at the beginning. Aval, however, when matter forms, time grabs a hold. When matter forms, time grabs a hold. Now that's a squidget of time after this, just a slight squidget of time after this. Sometime when we're together, we'll do a PowerPoint on this. It's all diagrammed out. So we have two perspectives of time. We have seeing time from here, just a bit into where the white is here, showing this creation, seeing time from here, and us out here on this oval. If we knew how much space had expanded from here to here, we would know how much to compress our 14 billion years to see what time would look like from here. Or conversely, we could say, well, the Torah gives us 5.5 days from here to here. Maybe the days really weren't days, but see, Rashi takes care of that in this section called Chagig in the Talmud, Chagiga, where he says Yom, day, 24 hours. It is the easiest commentary in all of Torah. The days are 24 hours each. There's no wiggle room on that. And Nachmanides says not only the days are 24 hours each, but like Kamoshesh Me'av day, like the 6 days of our work week. So you have 6 days, 24 hours each. Actually, it's 5.5 days up to Adam. 24 hours each. And on the other hand, we have 14 billion years. So if we knew this ratio, the scientist, it's just a number that comes right out of astronomy. I was only the lucky guy that knew enough Nachmanides. Then he tells us the time that the calendar begins here, and we are here. Okay, he tells us that. Astronomy comes to tell us what the nature of the universe is here and what the nature of the universe is here. And now we know this ratio. We just divide this number by that number, and you get how much space has stretched. There's a formula that goes into it. We don't have to mention it at the moment, but that only gives the exact. That only rounds off the number. But the number happens to come out to be about 900 billion. Not about. That is the astronomy number. It's not the Gerald Schroeder number. Gerald Schroeder did just one thing. I'll divide this by this. I'll divide the 14 billion years by that. Or I'll multiply 5.5 days by that, going that direction, either way. And what does come out to be that, in fact, 14 billion years, as we measure it, as we live it, because that's the time frame we live in, did in fact pass in 5.5 days from the perspective of the Torah, the author of our magnificent universe, and the author of the Torah, who describes the conditions and the position of the view for the 6 days of Genesis from here. The 5.5 24-hour days from the beginning looking forward are in fact mathematically come out to be 14 billion years from this perspective after this amount of growth and expansion of the universe. It doesn't matter that it shows that it's 6 days, it can show whatever it wants. But just if you went from this side, the scale, and the measurement is done by temperature. We don't have to get, if anyone later can understand, it's easy to describe it. Usually done by temperature. As the universe expands, the temperature drops. But just take this ratio to this ratio. You can make this paper that long or that long, but it's still the same ratio. And that ratio comes out to match exactly what we're talking about, namely that it is 14 billion years. It's not, and I think this is the famous letter by the Rebbe. In fact, as the rabbi may remember, at that time I know if I had contact with Chabad of 770. But in any event, there's a group called the Gedalia Club. Ranya Schaefer's husband was a very high person in Chabad, husband was killed by a drunken driver. He was murdered by a drunken driver, that way. And this is the Dahlia Club, which deals with this. And I was fortunate to give a few talks there, essentially on this, that it doesn't conflict with the idea that the universe is young, because it is young, but we don't live in this time zone, in this time perspective. We live here. We live in a universe here. But from the Torah's point of view, it is here, and it is 6 24-hour days. Not as if it is 6:20, if there's no humans here, but if you were zocha, if you merited to be from this point of view, and you watch the development of the universe, you would see a video in super fast forward. And then in fractions of a second, hundreds and thousands of years would go by from this point of view, but we don't live in this point of view. We live here. And if you were on Earth, there were dinosaurs that disappeared about 65 million years ago, and they would be 65 million years ago. But if you viewed it from the Torah's perspective, it wouldn't be 65 million years ago. It'd be like about that fast. So there are two, they're both literally true, because it is one reality from two different viewpoints, and both are true, provided you determine your perspective. I teach at a yeshiva called Esha Torah, and I haven't since the virus came. We've cut back tremendously on face-to-face teaching, but before that, for 20 years or so, I teach it. And the founder of the yeshiva, Noah Weinberg, an absolutely brilliant human being, said in any debate, in any discussion you have, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. First thing you have to do is define your terms. And here, the Torah defines its terms, that it is seeing time from here, and we are living out here. This is our normal time. So for us, everything seems normal. It would be normal, and it would be normal. That's our time zone. But if you viewed it from here, from this perspective here, it would be, to repeat myself, a video in super fast forward. So if persons want more detail for this, if you go to my website, or if you just go to Google and type in, probably the best way to say Age of the Universe, Gerald Schroeder, Two Views of One Reality. Or if you go to my website, geraldschroeder.com, you find this spelled out in great detail in about 5 pages of type and calculations, etc. You want the actual deal. But the key to remember is exactly what Rabbi Schroeder said at the beginning. Conflict comes of this, because until you know both together, the conflict, when you do, becomes together. The key is two perspectives. The takeaway is the universe is less than 6,000 years old, and the universe is 14 billion years old, and they both happen in exactly the same time. So if there are questions about this or any other related topics or non-related topics.
Professor, what about the dinosaurs?
Oh, in fact, I have an ebook called "Well, What About Dinosaurs?" and 34 Other Big Questions in the Torah. What are the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs, first of all, there's no need that the Torah talk about dinosaurs, but it doesn't talk about orange juice either, and I very often have orange juice for breakfast, so, or sometimes have, in any event. So the Torah doesn't have to talk about dinosaurs, but it's kind of interesting, in fact, that it does hint at something like dinosaurs, and in fact, it's relevant to the portions that we're reading the Torah at the moment. So in Genesis chapter 1, there's only one animal that has a size adjective, Taninim Gedolim, right? In day number 5, the big, Gedolim is big in the plural, big Gedol, Gedolim, Taninim, the big Taninim. And there are many translations. King James actually translates them as the big whales. I've seen the big dinosaur. No, I've seen the big whales. King James's big whales. I've seen the big crocodiles, and I've seen the big alligators, and I've seen even the big dragons. But the irony is, we know what tiny, because no one seems to know what tiny means. We know it's the Taninim Gedolim. Okay, and it's day number 5, the big Taninim, the singular, which is Tanim. And the irony is, for all these guesses that it was the whale for the King James and the crocodiles and the alligators, dragons, is we know what tanin means because it's used in Exodus in exactly the sections that we're reading now. Moses at the burning bush, God says, go back to Egypt. Moses says, nothing being, I'm going back, they'll kill me. Well, God says, I'll show you a trick. And you go back, you show the trick, they won't kill you. What do you have in your hand? A stick, a shepherd's staff. Throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground and it becomes a snake. The Hebrew word for snake there is nachash. There's no question what nachash means. It means snake, okay? Throws it on the ground and becomes a nachash. The Hebrew is important here, okay? Snake, nachash. Moses goes back to Egypt, meets up with Aaron, shlach et ami. They go to Pharaoh, let my people go. The great chant that we had when the Soviet Jews were being forced to get out, which eventually brought down the Soviet Union. It's amazing. The Jews brought the Soviet Union down, essentially. Aaron and Moses confront Pharaoh, let my people go, let my people go. Pharaoh says, show me a trick. So now Aaron is actually holding the stick because Moses is like the major speaker and Aaron is his prophet, I think he's called that. So Aaron throws the stick down on the ground and it becomes a tanin. It becomes a tanin. That's interesting. Can you imagine if King James was correct? That Aaron throws his stick down and it becomes a whale. The whale is bouncing along the floor. Pharaoh says, get out of here already. But it becomes a tanin. The fact that it becomes a tanin and Moses doesn't say, what are you doing, Aaron? I wanted a snake. You gave me a whale, a crocodile. The fact is that it has to be the same event at the burning bush because Moses wasn't surprised. It's just that the Torah uses a different word. It uses the word tanin. So nachash and tanin are the same. Because in front of Pharaoh, the stick became a tanin, and at the burning bush, it was called a nachash, and it's the same phenomenon as we know, because there's no argument between Moses and Aaron. I want a snake, and you gave me a tanin. So tanin has to be related to a snake. But we know tanin is in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 only has general categories, except for one being Adam. So tanin has to be a general category in which snakes fall. What's the general category snakes fall into? Reptiles. Tanin means reptiles. Taninim gedolim, the big reptiles. Now, the first major translation of the Hebrew was into Greek. It's a Septuagint. Try to stay, just listen to this a little bit more, friends, and you'll find something interesting. So had the Greek translation, the Septuagint, 200 years ago, been faithful to the Hebrew, if Hebrew being translated into Greek, the Septuagint, it would have translated tanin gedol, big reptiles, into Greek. Well, how do you say big reptiles in Greek? You all know the word. Dinosaurs. Had the Greek been faithful to the Hebrew, we would have the word dinosaur in the Torah. Dinosaurs. Dino means big and terrible. Saurus means reptile. But the Greek didn't follow the Hebrew. The Greek had some other cockamamie idea and he went off and called it something else, okay? That's his own business. But the Hebrew was saying, and dinosaur is a Greek word, dinosaurs. Dino means big or terrible. There's several words, obviously I'm choosing the word that the Greek, one of the Greek words that you put in there, but dinosaurs means the big reptiles. So, Rabbi, dinosaurs have been since day number 5 of Genesis chapter 1, the 26th and 27th sentence.
That's a remarkable explanation, but how do you explain that the dinosaur fossils would be dated 25 or whatever?
65, the last dinosaurs around, well, the major kill-off was when a force from outer space literally destroyed them 65 million years ago. But
according to your early explanation, where you said that the Torah account of history of just shy of 6,000 years is accurate, then how can that coexist with the
well, because you don't live as much as you would love to live in God's view. part of you saying, but neither you nor I nor anyone lives in God's view. From this point, in fact, from this view, if you were viewing those fossils from here, which you could, but there's no people here, so you have to step into God's presence, how you could say, like what the word would be, then you would find that the dinosaurs did exist about a day and a half ago. Plus the 6,000 years, because from Adam forward, we have the 6,000 years. So if you have to go back from Adam, you count the years back to Adam, and then you add about a day and a half or so to get back to the dinosaurs from this point of view. But you don't live in this point of view. No one does. God does. And that's no, I'm not going to say even God does. I'm going to say the Torah's point. God presents us a picture from the Torah because we don't know much about God. We know Torah and Teva. That's what we know about God is Torah and Teva. Okay, nature and the Torah. So the Torah says, from this point of view, you want dinosaurs? They're right out here on. I have it on this on this wonderful. I didn't do this, but these have the days here. So the you would find that the can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you see that? Yeah, there you go. There's day number 5. The color coding shows the duration of each of the days over these 6 days. The dinosaurs, from this point of view, would in fact be about 5 days, or about 6,000 years, because we have to add the 6,000 years of ours. But from here, you'd be about 5. They would look a few days old from that point of view, because everything is compressed. But you don't see time from that view. You see time from this view here. You see time, we live here. And it is 65 million years ago that they disappear. And they first appear about 320 million years ago, just about the time bit after other reptiles appear. So there are 2 points of view. Those fossils, we live in a frame of time where billions of years have gone by. The fossils do date millions of years, 65 million years ago, a meteor crashes into the earth, changes the environment entirely. The dinosaurs are destroyed, as most of life was destroyed at that time also. But from the Torah's perspective, it's not 65 million years ago. It's a day and a half. If you it's a day and a half before Adam. Forget the 6,000 years we're talking about after Adam.
Do you have any comment about evolution?
Beg your pardon?
Thank you. Do you have any comment about evolution, the idea of evolution, Darwin?
Well, I think Darwin gets a very bad rap because no one ever bothers to read the last paragraph of Darwin's book. The closing lines in every edition of The Origin of Species, a published in 1859, except for the first. The first edition doesn't have what I'm about to read, but Darwin, by his colleagues, was forced to rush into print very rapidly because another scientist, Wallace, who had the identical approach, but had a more godly approach with the development of life, was about to publish, and his colleagues, meaning Darwin's colleagues, says publish immediately. So he published, and then within 6 months, he made a second edition. After that, maybe many, many other editions. And all editions end with the following statement. That here it is. I'm doing it from memory, but I could go. I'm not going to go to my bookshelves now and dig it out. I just tell you. The Creator with the capital C. This is Darwin. The closing lines of The Origin of Species, the book you're talking about. The Creator put these powers into a few forms or one, so that life could develop over time. The Creator, capital C, Darwin gets a bad rap. He says that the Creator set the system up, and I agree with him entirely. He didn't nearly have any of the information we have today of the complexity of life. All statistics say it can't have happened by chance. There's not a single calculation that says randomness can produce the complexity of the DNA. Life had a single beginning. All of life has the identical DNA. That's why this mRNA works so well. It's all of life, whether you're a pine tree, whether you're a bacterium, whether you're an Einstein, whether you, me, or the rabbi, or a flower, you have the identical DNA inside you, the identical genetic code, the same alphabet. It just spells different things. For you, it spells you. And for me, it spells me, and for the pine tree, it spells pine tree. But it's the same alphabet. Just like on the shelves I have here, you don't see them because they're books of many, many different languages, except for the ones that are in Russian. And I can't even read them, but my books are in Russian and in Korean, I can't even read them. They have the same ABCD, but some spell words in French, some spell words in Spanish. It's the same alphabet. Nature produces an alphabet that no one knows how it happened. No one. There is no, in fact, Feynman, that brilliant Nobel laureate Feynman says, if anyone tells you that they understand how life started, they're either naive or liars. And Feynman he was a wonderful human being, and the fact that a person that you like is going to make these discoveries is great Kiddush Hashem, but he wasn't an observant Jew in an extreme. I'm not going to go into the extreme, but in the extreme. And yet he says anyone that can tell you that they know how life starts is either naive or a liar. We have no idea how rocks and water became alive. You realize what this diagram says? That's why I say it's the most phenomenal religious statement ever. There's nothing out here. There's a video. I urge you, please. It'll cost you 5 minutes and 28 seconds of your life. That's all. There's no money cost, but it's 5 minutes 20. Called Proof of God in 5 minutes. It has over 4 million views. Web-wide, it's almost 5 million. On the parent side, it's 3.5 million. That's with an M. Okay, it's me as a talking head, but with magnificent graphics, which had nothing to do. I take no credit for the graphics. We had no idea anyone would even watch it. Over now, millions of people have watched it. Have seen it. Proof of God in 5 minutes. It takes this diagram and shows that the creation of the universe, as described here, is an exact match of the biblical description of the creation of the universe. Proof of God in 5 minutes, or belief in God. Different people have hijacked it, but it's proof of God in 5 minutes, or belief in God in 5 minutes. The description is exactly, but look what this diagram says. There is nothing. The black isn't empty space. It's nothing. It's something that doesn't fit into our head. You cannot conceive of nothing. Any thought that you have is in the same box, time, space, and matter. No one thinks out of that box. Every dream you have has some aspect of time, space, and matter. So you can't think out of that box. But this is out of that box. This is nothing. A vacuum isn't nothing. A vacuum is empty space, and space is something. So this diagram says from absolute nothing, a burst of energy comes. How? Oh, by quantum fluctuation. I don't know if you can see that word there. These notes are scribbling. A quantum fluctuation is my finger. Ed Schreier in 1973 pointed out, he went to his grave. There was no acclaim of his phenomenal insight, which was 30 years before anyone else ever thought of it. He published it in one of the most important journals in the world. I mention his name because it's a horrible thing. This man predicted what science would eventually say. He published in Nature that the laws of nature create the universe from absolute nothing. Do you realize? You make that very clear. The laws of nature can produce something from nothing, because in reality, if according to the laws of nature, there's never nothing. But what are the origins of the laws of nature? God. I mean, why would there be laws of nature? Why would there be nature? Why would there be existence? People just jump these way downstream questions. At the very beginning of the universe has all the fingerprints of God that you want on it. The universe is created from absolute nothing. And then billions of years go by, and then we have life. And someone asked about evolution. According to the Torah, life develops over time. That's why there are 6 days. You have plant life, and then we have animal life, day 3 plant life, animal life, day 5, then more animal life, the beginning of day 6, and then human life. That's exactly the flow of the fossil record. The fossil record describes that in about hundreds of millions of examples. The Torah gives us 6 sentences. 6 sentences for the development of animal life. I mean, give it a break, there's not much information, but the life developed from the simple to the complex is a given. That's science. Torah says it, and science says it. The difficulty is, though, that this development of life has been hijacked, and now I've had the fortune over several years, good fortune over several years, of talking to, it's not a big sample, but 4 professional evolutionists. And all 4 over these years, not one right next to the other, but separated by time and didn't know each other. At least the discussion didn't take place together. All described evolution as following. You have a form of life, random mutations in the sex line of that life, they mate, and then the progeny carry these mutations and are different from the parents. If those mutations are good, then they survive. If the mutations are bad, then they don't survive. And then that mutation. First of all, mutations are not a problem. The Torah knows very well about mutations. Where? Well, an entire section, I can probably actually the chapter, but the mutation, the section in Leviticus has a whole section dealing with Levites who are mutated that they can't serve in the temple. Just like the offerings have to be perfect in the temple, so the Levites have to be perfect in the temple. That serve it. Not that they're inferior, they can eat from the sacrifices, but they have to be perfect. So if they've mutated and have a mutation that makes them look like this or like that, or one eye this way, that way, they can't serve. So the Torah is well aware of mutations change the shapes and beings of living persons and of living animals. So that life develops over time is completely fine. The problem with evolution is the word random, because the description has always been random mutations in the sex line. The word random is the problem. There are 0 data that shows the mutations are random. And in fact, when you do the mathematics, and this goes back to the first conference was in 1966, Wister, W-I-S-T-E-R, in Philadelphia. And from that time forward, it has always been this confrontation. The mathematics show that the number of changes that have to be juggled to make this become that are statistically impossible to be by chance. And one of the biologists always said, well, we know they're by chance, so your mathematics must be wrong. But there are volumes of mathematics that have been done this, and they all show the same answer. It couldn't happen by chance. And that happens to be what Darwin said. The creator put these forces into a few forms so that they would develop in a certain way. I think Darwin overstated the case because, in fact, you have to have tinkering in there. The numbers show time and again. I don't have a strong enough background in statistics to actually do those calculations, but I have enough colleagues that do, and I know them and I know their background, and the numbers simply show that randomness is not the driving force with the development of life. That evolution is the wrong word to use. Use the word develop. Does life develop from the simple to the complex? Absolutely, I hope so, or the Torah is wrong, and the likelihood of the Torah being wrong is about 0. Because the Torah shows first came plant life, then came life in the waters, which happens to be correct, and the timing of when these happen, because in Genesis you know the timing because you know which day it takes place. They match exactly. The calculation that shows day by day the passage of time, the science number that shows when each day would occur in these billions of lines, in billions of years lines, let us know when these different days come. So it would predict that these, like the Taninim Gedolim would be out here on this day number 5, and plants would be back here on day number 3, and this thing. And they match exactly. And that's why I urge you, if you can go to my website, in fact, you can go to aish.com, Age of the Universe, 2 Perspectives of One Reality. You'll find about a 6-page description there, which also includes day by day what happens from the Torah point of view, from the science point of view. They're spot on match. So for a very long answer to your very short question, I don't believe in evolution, but I do believe in the development of life. If you define evolution as the changing of life over time, then I believe in that. But if you have the word random in there, then it's wrong. It's just simply wrong. It doesn't work. And when I'm working with high school students, I always say never, and also university, but never confront your teacher and ask her, show me that it's random. Never do that. In fact, for university students, when you have more advanced classes in biology, I implore my students, not my students that I'm teaching, not teaching biology, but teaching this Torah science stuff. Never, ever corner the teacher and say, show me that it's random, because you probably won't get your degree. Or if you get your degree, you can guarantee that the letters of recommendation that you will ask, these are documented cases where they've gone to the courts, the letters of recommendation that you will ask your teacher to write so you can get into some kind of a job or whatever position you want in grad school will be very negative. Never corner your teachers and ask them to show you. I'm not talking about Chabad. I'm talking about, I don't like to use the word secular, but science teachers that have only a materialist view of the world. Never corner them and say, now prove to me, show me any indication that it's random. They won't be able to do it, but you can rest assured you will suffer from that professionally, because I have colleagues that have suffered from that professionally. It's a terrible thing, but the way that the world is set up at this moment, there are certain certain approaches which force you to keep some of your views to yourself, at least until after you get your first job and have made a reputation for yourself. So that's a long answer. Yeah.
Professor, this has been an extraordinary presentation where you've explained to us that with a proper understanding of time, of the complex nature of time, we can resolve the seemingly simple conflict with regards to the age of the universe. With an actual understanding of Darwin's theory, we can understand that it's not actually in conflict with Torah at all. It's just that Darwin wasn't the atheist that time has made him to become. And with a proper reading of Torah, we can understand that the Torah does speak about the great dinosaurs, which were created on the 5th day of creation. This has been extraordinary. I'd like to open, if anybody has any questions to the professor. Anybody has any questions to the professor?
I see someone speaking, but it's muted. Nancy, are you asking something?
No.
I have a question.
That would be Michael Wolof.
Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Michael Wolof. Hi. I really enjoyed, I came in late, but I loved your explanation of basically the time. The way I see it is the time is judged on two different scales.
Two different perspectives. It's two different perspectives.
But you made it very clear for me. I really enjoyed that. I wanted the video, the proof of God in 5 minutes. Where would I find that?
If you just go to Google, it has so many views.
We sent it to you in the email, Michael, on Monday. If you look in the email that we sent you from the shul office on Monday, office@jewishgardens.com, it was inside of that email. We put that file for you.
Okay.
If you go to Google, just go to Google, Proof of God in 5 minutes, Gerald Schroeder, you'll find it.
Okay.
It's Gerald Schroeder.
Thank you very much, Gerald.
Professor, have you ever met Arno Penzias?
No, Robert Jastrow, but not Penzias. This is my own fault. I can tell you in a moment. It's either Jastrow or Penzias that we had meetings with in New York. I have to apologize. That sounds silly, and both of them are major. Penzias shares the Nobel Prize for the fact that the universe had a creation, and Jastrow founded NASA. They both hold very. So I apologize. I met one of the two of them, and if it weren't 2:30 in the morning here or 2:40, I could probably find it, because there was this huge, wonderful video made by Roy Varghese called "Has Science Discovered God?" and he was part of it. So the answer is, it's a terrible. I apologize tremendously. He doesn't judge. I have to say I confuse him with Jastrow. Penzias and Jastrow, and they're both at the equal levels as far as astronomy goes. Okay, so the answer is maybe.
I met him years ago where he gave a very similar lecture on Bereshit and the Big Bang. So many years ago.
Yeah, they are the ones that discovered the cosmic background on which this diagram is totally based. The irony is they didn't know what they discovered. As he probably told you, they were working at Bell Labs, and Bell Labs is totally that was when Bell Labs was the huge Bell Labs that it was in New Jersey, and they were searching for why there's this static in the communication between satellites. They couldn't get rid of the static. So Penzias and Wilson, Penzias was the maid, Wilson was his technician. Penzias and Wilson were searching to try to find out there's a hum in the background. First they thought that it was pigeons living in their antenna that they were measuring this from. It's a pretty funny piece of history of science. And the pigeons had put all this guano, the droppings, and they got clean. In any event, the static remained. And they didn't know what it was. They were in New Jersey, and Penzias realized that, we don't know this much about what's going on out there in space. Let's call up an astronomer. So they called up Princeton University. It's a famous piece of history in the history of science. And they asked for Professor Peebles, Peeb, Peebles, who's written a book called Principles of Cosmology, which is extraordinarily good. This goes back in the 60s, and they describe to Peebles what they've discovered, and they don't know what it is. Does he have any ideas? This is a piece of magnificent. He puts the phone to the side. He turns to his colleagues, Peebles. Then they're on the phone now, right? He puts the phone away from his mouth. He turns to his colleagues and he says, "Friends, we've just been scooped." Peebles was writing a grant proposal to the United States government to get the money to build the exact type of antenna that Penzias and Wilson were using it to measure the background. They didn't know what Penzias and Wilson were commercial. They're doing this for commercial work, and people can do it for pure science. Friends, we've just been scooped. People told them what they discovered. Penzias and Wilson published this, and from that publication earned the Nobel Prize for changing our understanding of the world. Overnight, bingo, like that. The centuries-old understanding from the scientific community that the universe was eternal evaporated. Einstein thought you realize the universe eternal? Genesis is wrong from the first sentence. Forget the rest of the stuff. Genesis couldn't even get it right for the first sentence, that there was a big, a creation to our universe. Then suddenly, like that, gosh, Genesis got it right all along. It was. And overnight, the understanding of the world changed. They knew what they discovered, but what they discovered changed our understanding of humanity. Our universe had a beginning. And we are made from the light of creation. It's not poetry. Every one of us, everything, the shirt on your back, your body, every material thing of you, including the chair you're sitting on, and you, is made from the light of creation. It isn't poetry, it's reality. There's only one physical creation. That's this, energy. Energy became alive. You and I were stardust 5 billion years ago. It's not poetry. We were stardust. And then we became this, and finally we became alive. And then God puts the nephesh into animal life, and then the neshama on top of us into a certain animal. And that animal becomes the first human being, Adam and Eve. We are really part of the universe. It's so poetic that it's beautiful. It's just, truth.
Professor, one final thing about the actual Big Bang Theory. So Big Bang being the beginning of all scientific existence, according to this developing theory. How would that gel with the Torah perspective on creation?
I say the discovery of the Big Bang is the best news for God since Moses came down from Sinai, except for the founding of the state of Israel. The Big Bang says there is creation. Before the understanding of the Big Bang, the understanding was the universe was eternal. The Big Bang says the Bible got it right. There was a creation. It doesn't say how the creation happened. but it does say that there was a creation. Then later commentaries, Nachmanides and others, give some hints about the of the creation of the time. That's what the video of Proof of God in 5 minutes is about. But the Big Bang is I say it again, the best news for God since Moses came down from Sinai. I always say, except for the sound of the state of Israel, that's also. But the Big Bang says, the Bible says there was, Big Bang is just, in fact, the term the Big Bang was coined by a person who had no relationship to God whatsoever. Everyone has a relation. He didn't realize he did until later in his life when he became an over-the-top believer, when he realized that nothing could happen by chance. Fred Hoyle, in the very early 1950s, was being interviewed with the first understandings of maybe there was a beginning, and so to get a bit of pizzazz into the discussion, the moderator knew that Hoyle assumed that the universe was eternal. Later in his life, he becomes 100% understanding. In fact, he develops a whole system that shows that by his words that it couldn't happen by chance. But then he was completely materialist, and the moderator, to get some pizzazz into the conversation, says, well, Professor Hoyle, what do you think about this creation of the universe? And Hoyle said the following: they think there was some kind of Big Bang. That's the origin of the term of Big Bang. It's complete derision. They thought there was some kind of Big Bang. So that is the origin of the term the Big Bang, complete derision. But it stuck. So,
how liberating to be able to have this conversation with you tonight in just 1 hour, to be able to cover all of the great mysteries of the founding of the universe, and to hear you speak of them with such clarity and confidence is really something so very beautiful. Maybe we could take one or two final questions. Alyssa, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. First of all, this was an incredibly enlightening evening. I just loved the whole thing. How do you feel about the concept that there could be life outside of our solar system?
I would, in fact, I think I mentioned that in Genesis, the Big Bang. I think if we find life outside the solar system, I think it's absolute proof of God. Absolute, not maybe, absolute. Life is so complex. We even finding it one time is over the top. You find it again, it's just absolute proof of God. The Torah talks about the earth and our existence. The Torah is oriented towards us. I know this may sound like apicursus, but there might be life elsewhere. The Torah doesn't make any claim about that. The Torah tells us the information that we have about God is the Torah and Teva. So could there be life elsewhere? Maybe yes, maybe no. Could it be intelligent? I have no idea. I wouldn't take a stand on that one way or the other. But I would say that life is so complex. In fact, the materialists like Francis Crick that discovered and Watson the shape of the Crick, Watson, and Wilkinson, the three people share the Nobel Prize for the shape of the DNA molecule, the stuff that makes you and a pine tree, felt that life was essentially a miracle, but they could not live with the word miracle. They said it was almost miraculous. It may have been planted here on Earth. Because that they were not able to accept the fact that there may have been some divine tinkering to turn rocks and water into life, because that's what happened. Rocks and water became you and me. And before that it was light. So life elsewhere, I would have no theology. I personally, but that doesn't mean anything. But my theology, as an Orthodox Jew, I would have no problem with life being elsewhere in the universe, because the Torah talks about here. It doesn't say too much about life outside. God creates the heavens. Notice notice the open sentence of the Bible. It doesn't say God created the earth and the heaven. God created the heavens, and then came the earth. Heavens and earth. The order is heavens and then the earth. So the heavens precede the earth. And that's exactly why Rashi sends us to Proverb number 8 to understand Genesis chapter 1. I am wisdom. God made me as the beginning of God's ways. And it goes on, before the earth, the heavens, before everything. So there's a flow of the heavens have no problem being older than the earth.
Thank you.
Yasher Koach, Doctor. Thank you so very much. We know that it's almost 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in Jerusalem, and we are just so grateful for your taking the time to be able to be with us here tonight. I would like to conclude this evening by just saying thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time. Thank you for your
Yes.
expertise.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
We are richer as a people having you amongst us. And thank you. I just want to let everybody know that you can purchase Dr. Schroeder's books. They're available online on Amazon, I believe. Gerald Schroeder is his name with a CH, Schroeder. The Science of God is a fascinating book. Genesis and the Big Bang, I think, is another one. They're all listed on his website, geraldschroeder.com, and highly recommend the 5-minute video, Belief in God in 5 minutes. And certainly to read his books are really an exercise, a treat for the neshama, a treat for the soul, and a delight for our minds. So Dr. Schroeder, if you could just make a closing comment, please.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that you remember what you said at the beginning. Our first meeting so many decades ago, south of the border. Well, you're in South Africa.
Very south.
I think the takeaway is when you see a conflict between Torah and Teva, between Torah and science, make sure that you understand both the Torah and the science. Never try to bend the Torah to match the science or the science to match the Torah. First, be sure to understand both in depth. And there are answers, and there are people out there, not just me, there are many scientists, many theologians who are also scientists that see this. But the idea of a conflict, exactly as the rabbi said before, when he was saying, he said, geez, stealing my lines. It could be a conflict because there's one author for the Torah and one author for Teva, for nature. So nature can't say something that contradicts Torah, and Torah can't say something that contradicts nature. The description of the age of the universe is just one example. It's an example that's been a stumbling block to a lot of people. So thank God I'm just, I don't like to use the word lucky, but I didn't design it. I fell into it, this idea of being able to, but one thing is interesting, by the way, the irony that describes the days just here, it shows how, Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the, it's a great statement, chance favors the prepared mind. The mathematics, the formula that develops this relationship with the days is the exact formula that I used for years in my work in nuclear physics, pure nuclear physics. And suddenly one day I said, that's the most common formula in the universe. That's a formula is just a relationship. So it's the word relationship. That's the most common relationship in the universe. If God were using a relationships, that's what God would likely use. And I used which I used every day for my entire grad school work in nuclear physics, and then after grad in the physics department at MIT. The exact same formula. And all I did was put in the numbers of astronomy, and out popped the duration of each day. So what Louis Pasteur said so well, fill your mind with information. Someday, chance will favor the use of that. That happens to be the entire origin of the germ theory. By the way, I'm not going to get into the history of the germ theory, but that's from Pasteur and Lister.
I think the takeaway is that we can certainly not judge by a superficial perception or superficial understanding. Even Charles Darwin wasn't. If Charles Darwin knew that he was to become the Bible for atheists, he would be horrified because he himself was a believer. I think his father was a pastor, if I'm not mistaken, and that he even wrote a book called Confessions of a Sinner, perhaps. I think he did. But
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised because once you see the beauty that's involved here, it's hard not to see. The deeper knowing the physics that makes a rainbow a beautiful thing doesn't take away from the beauty of the rainbow. In my opinion, it makes it even more beautiful when you understand how it works.
That's our role as Jewish people, is to be able to use our minds, use our brains, to be able to dig deeper, to understand and to contemplate, to meditate, and not to have a mere drive-by education. In our generation, unfortunately, our attention spans are incredibly challenged. And if something takes more than 15 seconds to load, it's already becoming an achenvei. So to be able to experience the age of the universe now in just 60 minutes was really a Jules Verne around the history of the world in 60 minutes was really something very, very special. Dr. Professor Gerald Schroeder, thank you for joining us here at the Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens. We are so grateful for your time. We hope you get some rest tonight. And
I plan to take off my shirt and go back to bed.
Thank you.